Hi everyone, welcome to 345 Tech Talks podcast. I'm here today with Gerry Kelly from Optus Homes, and Gerry is the founder of Optus Homes, which is and Gerry produces an app for the social housing sector. And what I'd like to do first, Gerry, is just ask you to introduce yourself a bit more, give us a flavour of your background and how you got to be a tech startup founder.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks for inviting us on the podcast. Really delighted. So I'm Gerry Kelly, and I'm the founder and CEO of Optus Homes. So my background actually is very unrelated to the sector. I've worked in various sectors, including the entertainment sector, logistics and supply chain sectors for physical products. I'm essentially a business development and marketing guy and strategy development person for large clients, both on a national and international basis. However, a couple of years back, when I exited my last corporate position with Sony, a couple of years back, a friend of mine asked for some help in a product he was producing for a local council, and it was a residence portal, a web portal. And while the product itself was good and was appropriate, I guess, for the time, it was pretty obvious that there were a lot of shortcomings in a web portal. And so the concept developed from there with regards to what would tenants actually like. And because of the drive towards mobile and the power of mobile, the ubiquity of the phone, and this massively powerful device in everybody's pocket, we quickly came to the conclusion that it should be a genuine mobile app rather than a tenants portal. We did a lot of research with landlords in social housing and with tenants, and hence we founded Optus Homes. I founded Optus Homes, and we put together a really good but small board of people to support us, and we launched in January 2020, so just before lockdown. So
Yeah.
that's where we've come from.
Well, I mean, you've done very well, given the fact that there's been lockdown and all that sort of thing. Then you've done well to get to get the position you're in now, because it's been tough for everyone, but it's tough for it's really tough for new businesses. But that's not really what we're here to talk about. So one of the things I'd like to know though is that, I mean, one of the things that, let me first say that one of the things that I was really interested about when we first started having conversations, which was probably towards the end of last year, was that was the way that you'd approached your business, in that you had the idea, but you went very, very quickly into the validating that with customers and getting potential customers on board, which is, I think, where a lot of startups go wrong, because a lot of startups are built by techies that want to build things, and so they just build it and they will come thing. But you almost did the opposite. So what was the what else did you feel was your approach that you wanted to take, and how much of that was intuitive and how much did you learn?
I think you're right. We sat and we considered very, very carefully how we wanted to initiate and then roll out our program. So I think any startup knows that they've got to do three things. They've got to raise some capital to do what they want to do. They've got to build their product, and then they've got to sell their product. They're the three main steps. Now, I think the smarter ones tend to build the product first and then go looking for capital, because investors are far more interested if you can show them a product. And then collectively, they go and sell that product, and hopefully they all do very well. We actually flipped that on its head again. And the first thing that we did was we sold the product. So in other words, we went out into the marketplace and we talked to multiple potential clients, housing associations, and discussed with them what they wanted and what we were planning to do, and refined that down until we got to a position where one of them, actually, several of them, said, that's what we want. You build that and we will buy it. So we actually had made a sale first. We then went and built the product. And now we're looking to raise funds. We're at that stage where our step 3 is a funding round. So it was sale first, then build, and then a funding round. But in addition to that, we were very, very careful on how we wanted to structure. And we made a very early decision that we were not going to have an in-house tech development team, that instead we wanted to partner with the best in the sector. And so we spoke to all our technology is built on the Microsoft stack. So the app is built on Xamarin, which eventually will be Maui, and our backend is Microsoft Azure. And we spoke to Microsoft about who best in class were for them with regards to the 2 or 3 elements that we wanted. One was building the app. 2 was the app backend, Microsoft Azure. And really, really important for us was the capability to use good quality integration partners to integrate into a landlord's existing environment. And that's where we met yourselves, 345, which has been
Absolutely.
a really, really great relationship. So thank you very much for that.
No, and so that's a really good and a powerful thing, because when you talk about investability and raising capital, you know, the fact that you've got a product and you've got customers means that that's much, you know, infinitely more investable than just an idea. So hopefully that stands you in good stead as you continue to grow the business. But the way you've described it, it's you make it sound really easy. But what have been the hard things? What have been the, you know, if you to look back and sort of say the things that are really hard, what would they be?
Well, just on the easy part, I think in one respect we got slightly lucky, and I wouldn't want to minimize this in any way, but the whole lockdown scenario kind of worked in one sense in our favor, because it meant that we had time to develop. If we were out there in the middle of a very, very busy and buoyant market, and people looking for results very, very quickly and lots of meetings, we wouldn't have had the time to do the things very, very carefully that we did do with yourselves in 345 and with Agile App, who developed the app with us. So in that sense, that worked in our favor. The hard part, I guess there's a steep learning curve. Whenever you're in a new sector, there's a steep learning curve with regards to the sector, who the players are, what the systems are, all the terminology and the acronyms that go with every sector that we all get involved in. And because of that, we were very, very careful in who we chose as our board members. We've got somebody from the sector, Andrew Giles, who is a long-term player and highly respected in the sector. He sits on our board as our domain director. So that learning curve was pretty steep, for us very, very quickly. I think the other difficult part was probably a learning from us to the sector. And that learning was getting the sector to appreciate the difference between a traditional tenants web portal, which may be responsive and play on a mobile phone, and a genuine tenants mobile app. Because once you move to a mobile app, the functionality just increases dramatically. You can use an awful lot more features on the mobile phone handset that you can't use with a tenant's web portal. Think of things like geolocation, or necessarily
push notifications,
push notifications, that type of thing. And of course, there's a category in the middle which are called progressive web apps, or PWAs, which are portals, web portals, but closer to and often referred to as apps. And they're not apps; they're web portals, but they're quite progressive. They're better than your traditional responsive web portal. But some of the app stores won't allow progressive web portals on their app store. They simply won't stock them, won't allow them there. So the more we looked at it, and the more feedback we got, and the more we looked at what could be done with advanced features such as automatic translation through Microsoft Azure, cognitive services, or open banking features and things like that, the more we were absolutely convinced, and the more reaffirming feedback we got, that convinced us again and again that a genuine tenants mobile app was the way to go. So that was a difficult step for us, getting that message across to the sector, and it's still an ongoing step for us. We're still encountering that issue. I think the other difficult step was actually the big question of integration. The sector has many incumbent suppliers, both for housing management systems, but also for traditional CRM systems and repair scheduling systems and all sorts of systems. And sometimes there are multiple suppliers of those systems.
But it's a sector that buys product.
Absolutely, it buys product. It has been for some time, and occasionally they'll build something in house, which again is added on to the plethora of systems that you see in any large housing association. So working with 3, 4, 5 through that minefield with a company that knows integration and can demonstrate the capability there. It was difficult again for us to get the message across that we had that partnership, and that partnership was so strong. I'm working through that on our first clients, but it's been very successful. So we're taking that difficult step.
And no, that's really interesting. That first of all, like you say, you weren't an expert in the area, so you had a lot of learning in the thing in that sector. But it's interesting to say that you had to then, almost like teach the sector what's possible, or because people don't know what they don't know, and
Indeed.
if the thing with housing is that a lot of their business revolves around rent and repairs, and they're not necessarily they're not necessarily on a day-to-day thinking about, well, and let's stay abreast of the latest tech as well. That's not the way. That's not the way it always works. So having that, so that kind of approach of having to feed that back is a really important one.
And I'd even go further, Andrew, because if you think rent and repairs, those are the two big elements, or the two big communication elements. But even with something like repairs, most housing associations would understand and would be happy with the fact that you can report a repair via either a mobile phone or a tablet or a laptop. And that's their expectation. But in actual fact, when you integrate correctly with a mobile app, you can go further, not just report a repair, but also schedule a repair visit, because you're integrated into the landlord's repair scheduling partner. And that repair visit can be cancelled or changed or edited, and you can track repair visitors. So just like my Deliveroo pizza, you can see how far away is your plumber or your carpenter on the day of the repair itself. And on the rent side, traditional methods of paying rent have been they've been overcome in the past few years. That this idea of a daily or a weekly update file, which is some sort of a CSV into a landlord to tell them who has paid and who hasn't, that's been superseded. Technology now can pay rent via the app, but we're not trying to be a payment gateway. We partner with payment gateway companies, but technology can now make a payment and have that instantaneously updated into a landlord's environment. It's far more powerful. So it's also the art of the possible. And again, getting those messages across has been an interesting journey.
Yeah, but it's like you say with things like I mean, one of the things you just said with repairs and geotagging but also the fact that you can, if you've got something wrong and you can send a video to so the repairman can see a video of what's wrong before they've even set out, so they maybe know what spare parts that they need to take. It gives them a much better chance of fixing things first time as well, doesn't it? So it's not just I've got a problem, but it's like, oh, I've got a problem. They've seen the video, they know they've got the spare parts, and they come in with exactly the right thing to fix it.
Yeah, and if you consider where that might go eventually, not necessarily today, but eventually, that could be nicely dovetailed into some sort of an augmented reality type service, whereby the repair can be managed or put in situ, or a repair person can be helped. Or if you take it in another direction, when a tenant is reporting some sort of antisocial behavior, let's say it's an abandoned car or dangerous dogs or somebody selling drugs, if a picture is taken, then immediately we can geotag that, and the landlord will know if it's on their property or not. And so if it's not on the estate, it's just off the estate, or it's in an area that's not owned by that landlord, that housing association, they can know that. And then the response to the tenant is different. Instead of saying we'll sort it, they'll say we'll notify the police or we'll notify the council or whatever. And those things are really, really important. Rather than sending somebody out, they discovering that, coming back into the office and then actioning it. That can all be done simultaneously.
That's yeah. So it's all it sounds like there's no shortage of ideas for future development as well. So that's always a good thing. You don't want to run out of steam. You want to. They always say with startups you sell when you run out of ideas, but it sounds like you've still got a long way to go before you get there.
And I would say that those ideas are for the most part, being generated by the sector for us. So we've put together a small group of landlords that we call a steering group. It's just 5 or 6 landlords. Some of them are clients of ours, some of them are prospects of ours, but some of them have made it clear that they will never buy from us because they're happy with the solution they have, or they have no immediate plans to change. But all of their voices are really, really important in saying to us, hey, Gerry, can you do this? Or what about that? Or is this possible in the future? A very simple example is one local authority has said to us, can we give our residents, and not all necessarily tenants, but our residents in our local authority, can we give them the power in the app to wander around our area and take pictures of vacant or derelict buildings? Not that they will all necessarily be owned by the local authority, but at least it builds up a map of where those vacant and derelict buildings are. And then it starts a discussion or inquiry as to why are they vacant or why are they derelict, and it's a very public discussion. So there are lots of suggestions coming to us, but they're coming to us from the sector, which is vitally important.
And so, what one of the things that apps also do is they generate data, and in all sorts of ways. And what do you think are some of the real kind of opportunities for data that might come off the back of what you're doing?
I think the first thing to mention is that the data belongs to the landlord, in the sense that for GDPR purposes, we're acting as the data processor rather than a controller. So the landlord is a controller, and we hold very little genuine, discrete data at our end. It's mostly for credentials and identification. But you're quite right. There can be a lot of anonymized data which is generated and which is could be accessible. And again, we're having discussions about how that might be used, and it could be something to generate patterns or business intelligence around repairs, for example. So if there is a pattern around particular devices or appliances failing, particular brands or particular models failing, if there's a pattern around individual, let's say, external repair people being reported in a survey as being satisfactory or unsatisfactory, that type of data. On rent, there will always be patterns with regards to rent arrears and how they might be handled. And so that can, in turn, then help to predict for a landlord if somebody is tending towards arrears, starting to fall behind, and how a landlord might manage that situation. How there might be trends in the way rent is paid. Traditionally in this sector, there are still, believe it or not, there are still some people who pay their rent by taking cash to a post office and paying their rent in cash.
Wow.
Occasionally. It's not popular and it is decreasing, but it is still a feature. There are still people who write checks. I can't think the last time I wrote a check, but there are some people who write checks. There are people who pay with debit cards or credit cards or repeat payments. I think the landlords in general would like everybody to be on a direct debit, so it happens automatically. And the only thing that prevents that is if the funds are not available. But the nature of the sector is that people sometimes are disadvantaged and can't or won't set up that type of feature, so they tend to pay ad hoc or on occasions. But monitoring the trends of that, which might predict somebody heading towards arrears, are important. The trends for new rent payment technology such as open banking, which will absolutely revolutionize payments in this sector. It will drive costs so low, everybody will look back in a few years' time and say, why were we paying those big fees? Why were landlords and tenants paying those big fees? So I think the data will be valuable, but we need to sit down with our clients in the sector and understand how that data is best used for the benefit of not only the tenants, but the landlords as well.
I think that's an important thing, because one of the things you've kind of pointed out there, and it's an important one, because we talked before about integration, but the the thing is, the app doesn't store any information. The app surfaces information, and the integration pulls that from the landlord's own system. So that gives you a window into what is the actual the system of record within a landlord. Not it's not that the app's got this stuff. The app is just giving you the ability to retrieve that information and display it. It's not, this information doesn't belong in your domain. It belongs it belongs to the landlord. And that's
in the landlord's environment, indeed. And we just, as you said, we surface that from their environment into the app for the tenant. But also importantly as well, we write information in. So if a tenant wants to report a repair, the details of that repair are entered via the app, but into the landlord's environment. So it's registered in their environment, or they want to make a rent payment, or they want to. We've got a two-way messaging system in the app where a landlord can originate a message to a tenant, and a tenant can reply to that, and they can communicate over and back, or it could be originated by the tenant as well into the landlord. But it's like a messaging system which is contained within the app itself. There's also a group messaging system, so that if a landlord wants to send a message to a group of tenants, now that group could be all tenants, all of their tenants, or it might be a subset of tenants.
It could be people in the block of flats or something.
Absolutely, absolutely. You may want to communicate with that people in the block of flats to say that that fly tipping that has happened in the estate overnight, we'll get that cleared up by tomorrow evening. And it's just a message to those tenants because it doesn't involve everybody else, and it doesn't have to be individual messages. It's a group message. But you're right. All of that data is owned by and retained by the landlord, and we just process through the app. So we don't hold that data on behalf of the tenants or the landlords.
Okay, so just going to tighten. We've talked a lot about the app, but I want to kind of get back onto onto you and what it's like being a founder. So because when we think about startups, people have certain things in mind. You think about Silicon Valley and going around to VCs and making pitches and all that sort of thing. But what if you were to describe what the life of a startup founder is really like? What sort of picture would you paint?
I think it's a very interesting question, actually, because sometimes there's so much going on that you don't think about what's going on. You just need to keep progressing. But if you think of any aspect of a business, I mean, there is the product, and then there is the communication or the messaging, then there is the funding, and then there's the staffing, and then there is the actual sales process, and all of these are separate. So when you launch in a startup, you have to have an idea as to how you're going to achieve all of these. Now, thankfully, some of them are linear. We can't really go and raise funds until you define the process and the product and the message, etc. But we have progressed very, very rapidly in the first 18 months. We've been just around for 18 months. We've built the product and we've got customers and it is live. And as I said, we're looking for funding. So there is a lot going on. And I think any startup, any founder will tell you that there is never, ever enough hours in the day. Sometimes you look forward to the weekend so you can chill, and sometimes you look at the weekends or a bank holiday as, well, why isn't everybody else working? I'm working, so they should all be working as well. So,
well, I can now do my work without having to talk to all those people.
you can catch up on some of that stuff. But it is a very, very exciting process, and there's never been a better time to start, particularly a tech company. Because if you look at what cloud technology brings to a tech startup, and particularly public cloud technology, now we've chosen Microsoft Azure for many reasons, but in general, it allows us to pull modules and offer them to clients, which without cloud technology would take an awful lot of time to develop, to test, to roll out.
It's not that long ago. It's not that long ago before people had to physically buy servers and stick them in a data center and all that sort of thing. I mean,
absolutely. And the fact that you can decide what you want, the fact that you can decide, okay, I want to do a language translation service for the chatbot or the live chat, means you can talk to a public cloud server and just access their cognitive services module and run those services. Now, there's more to it than that. It's quite simplified overview, but it is there to be had. So it's very exciting. I think, if anything, there's an awful lot of planning. You can't just switch on one day. You got to plan what you want to do, how you want to do it. You got to have a plan for, we partnered with some pretty good people, I said 3, 4, 5, but also Agile app who help us with designing and building the app and our back end. We've got a very good lead tech individual guy called Grant Willivace, who drives a lot of that for us. And as I said, a good board as well. But there's always something going on. There's always something. Right now, fundraising is big for us. We're in this round of funding and talking to potential investors. We've actually turned down two different potential investors that just weren't right for us and what they were looking to do and what we're looking to do. The sector's taking note of what we're doing. You always need to be doing an element of PR and talking to and even further understanding the sector. The sector also right now has got an element of consolidation going on, both in the suppliers to the sector, so IT companies merging with other IT companies and being acquired, some new entrants into the sector, but also in the client side. So you've got housing associations merging with or being acquired by other housing associations. So there's a lot of activity going on in the sector as well. It's quite dynamic. It's very, very exciting. And there's also a regulatory element to everything that's happening. So the government are particularly post-Grenfell, they're getting quite vocal, as they should be, with regards to clarifying tenants' rights. A voice of tenant is really, really important, and it will only get stronger over the next couple of years. So I think our timing is right as well in bringing this particular product to market.
Because that can then be used as a tool to give tenants you give tenants that voice and give tenants the support that the regulation is starting to say that they need.
Yeah, and I think when we looked at getting into this sector, one of the factors was, is there a need for this? Is there an element of something being underserved or behind the tech curve that could be improved? And all those boxes were ticked. So as a startup, we knew we were getting into an area that could do with what we plan to bring to the area. But again, it is a learning. It's always a learning. And in any sector, you can never, ever stop learning. Nobody ever knows it all. So
and I think that's true for business in general, isn't it? That you can't you can never go past what you've learned. The only way you can do better is to learn more. I think that's
and there are methods of doing business. I mean, I've got my views on how to do business, and business in my view should always be ethical, but in as much as possible should always be open. And if I get told off for one thing more often than any other thing by my board, it's they give out to me for being open. I'm a big believer in being transparent about what we're doing, how we're doing it, and who we're doing it for. And that's because we want to be disruptive. And I don't mean disruptive in a negative way. It's in a constructive way. And I think this sector, one of the brilliant things about the social housing sector is it's got a really strong collegiate element to how it does business, because a housing association in one town does not necessarily compete with a housing association in a neighboring town. They have their geographic areas. There'll be a little bit of overlap, but they're very collegiate in the way they recommend or suggest solutions and suppliers. And you don't get that in the insurance industry or the automobile industry or in the most other industries, because they're all competing with each other. There's a big collegiate element. When you come to the supplier level of the suppliers supplying into those housing associations and local authorities, they tend to have a different approach. They tend to be quite protective of their patch, and
because they are competing. Yeah,
absolutely, they are competing with each other. So our approach is, we are a supplier, but we want to be very open and very transparent and adopt that collegiate approach that is in the client base into the supplier base. And you can see it immediately. You can see some suppliers who want to go that route. They're improving, they're becoming more open. Some of them are still a bit locked down. But of course, the market will dictate in the end, the social housing market, which is a combination not just of the landlords, but of the tenants as well, the customers. They will dictate which would survive and what services they want.
Well, it is a trend with technology that certainly with technologies, open technologies that play well with other technologies are the ones that have generally succeeded. So you can and now a lot of that's APIs, but in general, if you look at a lot of the software as a service. I mean, we use, for example, GitHub for some of our source code. Now, GitHub integrates with a whole, there's 1,000 companies that have built little add-ons to GitHub because it's open. And the more open you are, the more nicer you play with other people. It actually gives, so other people have built products for GitHub, but that makes GitHub more compelling because it works with so many things. And it's a similar thing. I think it's very short-sighted of people to be closed off, because ultimately you end up in a very lonely little place where you're not, because ecosystems add a lot more value than individual components.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. Couldn't agree more. And I think one of the smartest and nicest things that we heard said in the sector was one of the big housing management systems that said to us, they recognize that no company can do everything really, really well. And they recognize what they do well and what they do maybe not so well. And so partnering with other companies, be they large or small, unless there's a real strategic reason not to, but partnering with other companies is part of their strategy. That's what they want to do. They want to work with companies that bring something that adds benefit, real value to their client base. And that's not just a matter for the social housing sector, but as you said, for lots and lots of sectors, the companies that tend to recognize their limitations and are prepared to be open and partner with other companies tend to do well, because in the end, it's just an overall better offering for the client base.
Absolutely. So I'm conscious that we haven't got an awful lot of time now, Gerry. So I've got a couple of quick ones before we need to wrap up. So the first thing is, what advice would you give to any other aspiring founders out there who've got an idea for an app? What would you say to them?
Particularly for an app, well, as a startup, I would say, number one, plan. Don't jump into something, but plan. Do some research. Make sure you understand what you're getting into and what you're bringing to the market. Number two, as we just said, be open. Prepared to use APIs, whatever your backend is. If it's a public cloud, private cloud, but be open and be prepared to integrate. And I think number three, really, really importantly, choose your partners, your strategic partners carefully. It is part of what you're going to be and part of your DNA. Getting the right partner is very, very important. For us, key was integration, but an integration partner. But for anybody starting in a tech business, I would say carefully select your partners.
That's really that makes obvious sense. And the other thing is, I mean, we talked about learning just now. In terms of if you were to recommend a business book to someone, what would you recommend?
Now you've put me off the top of my head. Who Moved My Cheese?
I remember reading that ages ago.
Yeah.
I still sometimes, when I get upset, say someone has seriously moved my cheese.
but it's true. It's just such a simple little story, but it's true. Things change. You have to keep moving. You have to keep learning. We talked about learning and understanding your client base, and there's no such thing as ever knowing everything. The only thing constant is change. So you have to be prepared to move and change with times. Your client base will change, the market will change, tech will change, consumer requirements will change. So be ready for change, embrace it, lead the change.
Yeah, and embrace it and lead it. And that's excellent. If I mean, certainly with startups, I don't know if my favorite startup book is The Hard Thing About Hard Things.
All right.
By Ben Andreessen, who's now major VC in Silicon Valley, but and he was I think he was one of the PayPal founders. But that's just a fantastic story of what it's of life as a startup CEO that I would recommend to anyone. But but it is a light read. It's not a bit like, well, Who Moved My Cheese is a light read.
A very light read, yeah. But the fact that we both remember it, as a long time ago since I read it, means the message.
It was the 90s, wasn't it?
Yeah, it probably was, yeah.
No, that's excellent. So I think we need to wrap up now. But I'd like to thank you again, Gerry, for coming on the podcast, and hopefully, well, in the hopefully have you on again a bit further down the line, and you can recount the sort of the next phase of Optus Homes and the journey you're on.
Andrew, thank you very much, and thanks to 345 Technology, being great partners. And yes, would love to come back again. Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Gerry.
Cheers. Bye now.